Good morning! Welcome to my webinar, How I Reverse the Toxic Communication in My Marriage Without Saying a Word. And I am live now. If you're on, go ahead and comment that you're on. I'm so happy you're here. What I'm about to share today, I'm very passionate about. I'm going to show you how I completely reversed the toxic communication in my marriage without saying a word. Pop word in the chat if you want to learn the secrets that I'm going to dish to you today. So if you're struggling to attain the marriage that you desire and have been communicating in circles year after year, then you're in the right place. My name is Becky Aste. I have spent the last 10 years inhaling a ridiculous amount of information from workshops, books, research, oh my gosh, podcasts, spiritual advisors. I've been in and out of individual and couples therapy over the last decade. I've invested tens of thousands of dollars training under the leading experts in the field of somatic-based training, healing, and relationship coaching. And I've been on the verge of divorce, and I'm standing here to tell you a redeemed marriage with thriving communication is 1,000% possible. So you may not know this, but there is a huge misconception out there on how to save your marriage. So today I'm going to share with you why you don't need your husband totally on board or years of therapy to reverse that toxic dynamic, and how I was able to save mine. I'll walk you through it. Everyone who's on, can't see who you are unless you pop in the chat. Feel free to share where you're tuning in from today. So happy to have you here. So first I'll share how I discovered that long-term talk therapy is simply not helping, and in many cases may even be more damaging. And then I'll share with you 3 key secrets to achieving a healthy, mutually fulfilling marriage for yourself. And those 3 secrets, if you're taking notes, are secret number 1. Even if you think you've learned every communication tip out there, you can still save your marriage by learning an embodied approach to communication. Secret number 2, how to reverse the toxic dynamic in your marriage without years of therapy by learning an embodied approach to healing your trauma. And secret number 3, how to improve your communication even if your husband isn't putting in the work right now. So, before I get into the nitty-gritty details, let me share with you how I actually discovered this. I just had a carrot. I'm going to take a sip of water. All right, so I married super young, age 21. We were both babies, blind to how much baggage we were bringing in. Early in our marriage, I noticed this dynamic forming of what I called at the time chase and run. I'd chase, he'd run. And I didn't have the awareness that this, my sudden, unexpected death of my father when I was 18, and then soon after meeting my husband was a recipe for some deep abandonment issues. So anytime my husband wanted space or was quiet or did something without me, it would trigger this undealt with trauma in me. I felt crazy. I was like, oh my God, am I needy? Like, what is wrong with me? But my body just kind of took charge in those moments, and I felt this trigger. And I grew up for cherry, the cherry on top, icing on the cake. I grew up in a home where conflict was never, talked about. There was this perpetual hum of passive-aggressive tension in our home. And so I started very early on tearing through books and getting advice from every mentor I respected. Eventually had a different vocabulary to name this dance of codependency and addiction, continuing to pick up speed between us. And it seemed like the more I learned, absorbed, and educated myself on externally, it was as if all of my efforts were only adding fuel to the fire. Things only got worse until our toxic dance reached its head and we decided on a therapeutic separation so that we could find clarity on whether or not divorce was our only option. And I was devastated. My daily theme song was, should I stay or should I go? And I say it jokingly, but I was so confused. I was in this sad hell of despair and grief, and that's when I scrolled on Instagram one day and found a relationship coach who literally changed my life. I followed her content every day for 3 weeks, and my gut was screaming louder by the minute that I needed to be in her space. So I booked a call with her everything in my being, when I heard about her program, even though it was very new to me, what she was talking about, healing trauma through body work, everything in my being was a yes, but I was terrified to invest the money because I was afraid it would be another fail. Fast forward, I figured out the money because when you want something bad enough, you do anything it takes to make it work, and I dove in, and I learned how to heal my trauma. It was the first time I ever found clarity to that question after years of being tortured by the confusion. Should I stay or should I go? It was the first time I ever found clarity. And I learned to trust myself and communicate in this radically different way. Breathe into my belly, literally for the first time in 10 years. Didn't realize how much my breathing had to do with my trauma. And I started feeling differently. I started thinking differently. I started dancing differently. I started communicating differently on this energetic, subconscious and conscious level that had nothing to do with the words I was saying, and everything to do with this energetic balance and harmony being restored in alignment within my body. And then I witnessed my husband move with it. I started dancing differently and he started dancing with it. I was shocked. I learned to listen to my body, trust my gut, and move everything out that clouded my intuition in order to show up healed and whole in my marriage for the first time ever. And now what I'm experiencing in my marriage, I'm good with words, but it is hard to put into words. I still actually tear up. It just happened this week when my husband and I communicate through something that historically has derailed us, and now it's fusing this intimacy and connection that's only growing deeper with every conflict. I'm a classic conflict avoider. I've hated it. Conflict has always sent us into tailspins and, banning each other to the doghouse and isolation, and now it's fusing intimacy. And it feels like a miracle. It feels like this raised from dead experience, and I'm enjoying my husband from this place of wholeness for the first time ever since meeting him 15 years ago. So with that said, let's get into the details of how to make this happen for you. I'm going to dish 3 secrets to you today. So just lean in. If you have some coffee or whatever you're drinking, grab that coffee and take a deep whiff. Inhale its magical scent. And let's pretend we're girls at a sleepover sharing some really good, juicy stuff that we as women thrive off of. Okay? So the first secret I want to dish to you today is, even if you think you've learned every communication tip out there, you can still save your marriage by learning an embodied approach to communication. Me and Sebastian, if you're at my first webinar, you know how good I am. I actually have a certification in the ancient art of stick figure drawing, and that certification is called my kindergarten diploma. So if you're at my first webinar, I know that's why you're actually back today, is to see my incredible artwork. Hopefully you can see this. Okay, so Sebastian and I, we both grew up, right, in homes where if there was any kind of conflict or stuff that needed to be talked about, we'd feel it in the air. We'd feel it in our body, right? There's like elephant in the room, tension, things are starting to get, there's something going on here. And yet nobody would talk about it in our homes. If you can't see, that's an X over our mouth. Okay, so what happens is we're storing it all in our body, right? And right when we should be getting that out so that we're not holding on to all of this tension, we sweep it under the rug, we don't talk about it. Eventually it kind of seeps out, right? Like drips, or like a volcano, sometimes it explodes. If you can relate, put it in the chat. So how fun is that? When 2 humans grew up their whole life, this is how they learned, and it was, modeled to deal with conflict. And it's to no fault of our parents. It's often passed down by generation. We do the best we can. I truly believe that everyone does the best they can with the tools that they have. And so this is just what we learned. And so when we got married, right, how fun was this? When we were good. But when conflict arose, we stored it all in our body. We did not know how to talk about it. And so that, led to a lot of distance. We got further and further and further over the years. And now when I realize and I look back on the way that I grew up, I realized there's a lot of passive-aggressive tension in my home, stomping, and this constant background hum of an elephant in the room, and we were never elephant-free. Now that I know and have experienced this year for the first time ever what it feels like to have harmony in my home, I now recognize that I never experienced that in my home growing up. And so when we were young marrieds, right, I was in love with him. I didn't know what was happening, why we were getting further, month after month after month. And I tried everything. I tried every book, podcast, sought advice. I always come back and put it into practice, all these good nuggets and tools that resonated with me. And I think, ooh, that sounded perfect. That's exactly what I need. That'll get through to him. Let me even write it down and practice it perfectly so that when we talk later, it changes everything. That would be the underlying story going through my head, even if I didn't say it out loud. And I did this for 10 years. 10 years. I feel like Rose Dawson on the Titanic, if you've seen that movie, when at the beginning she starts telling her story and she's like, it's been 84 years. I danced in circles in my marriage for 10 years, trying everything and still spinning my wheels. So the idea here is that you don't actually need to go on this hunt to find the right therapist. It can be so discouraging, right? When you need help so badly and you're either put on a wait list, which happened a lot through COVID, a lot of therapists were in high demand, or you're just shopping around and you don't know if the therapist is a good fit until session 4 or 5, and if it turns out they're not, you just feel like you wasted your time. Especially if it didn't feel safe during those sessions, because when you bring up trauma without establishing safety in your body or your environment, it can actually traumatize you deeper. It's really, really important to establish safety and trust first. So the moral of this story is you don't need to go on this hunt for a magic book or the right therapist to save your marriage, the right podcast or the right couple to mentor you or get through to your husband. It's not something external you're missing at all. You're not missing the secret communication hack that Susie next door somehow found, yet you're blocked from behind this glass door. And guys, all of the answers are actually so much closer than you think. They're right inside of you, and you need to learn to trust you and hear you. And if you've been through trauma, you likely do not trust you right now. And that's okay. You likely do not hear you. You know, when I was in my trauma and I was in that state of should I stay or should I go, I personally had a very severed, corroded connection with my intuition. I did not know how to listen to my gut. I did not trust myself. And now I know it, you know, trauma does that over time. And emotional or psychological abuse can do that even more. Gaslighting. So if you've been through trauma, there's this energetic block there. No matter how much you read, learn, and practice, you'll never be able to experience healthy communication if you have unhealed grief, abuse, or toxicity stored in your body. Because guess what? He will feel that. I remember trying so hard to act cool, even though I was triggered as heck. Or not come off needy, even though I was really needing him to reaffirm me because I didn't know how to reaffirm myself. Or not to sound controlling, even though I was desperately grasping at straws for any little bit of control to hold on to. And the thing is, there wasn't harmony in my body. There was no congruency. What was coming out of my mouth wasn't matching the energy that lived inside of me. And it actually seemed like the harder I tried to get it right, the more it seeped and oozed out, and the less congruent I felt with myself, but also with him. The less intimacy, the further apart we grew. And the crazier I also believed I was. You ever have that thought, like, am I crazy? And you're not. You've just been through some stuff, and our Western society, you know, mainstream culture approach towards healing only knows how to offer, from what I have found in 10 years of searching, band-aid tips instead of really getting to the root of the issue. And so in my marriage, Sebastian was so used to sniffing this after 10 years. At first, he'd try to be empathetic, and then he realized he could never really satisfy me because I was like this emotionally insatiable bucket with cracks in the bottom. And my trauma cracks prevented me from being able to trust hold or keep anything, any external validation being poured into me. Eventually, this chase and run dynamic sent us into separate bedrooms and eventually separate homes, trying to decide if this marriage was even salvageable. And with the old model of fixing your marriage by better communication strategies, tips, and hacks, you have to do all these things you don't really want to do. None of us really want to do all these extra things and these hoops to jump through. But with this new model of healing your trauma through a body, mind, somatic approach, it's not a problem, okay? Let me give you a bird's eye view of this new model. So what this means is you can heal your relationship just by learning to heal and trust your body. You can establish safety again in your body. Something that you can practice every single day, wherever you are, without years of therapy, where you have to wait another week for an hour of your therapist's time before you know the next steps. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, I don't even know if I have trauma or what the heck embodied or somatic healing means. And so that brings me to secret number 2. Secret number 2, the second secret today, is how to reverse the toxic dynamic in your marriage without years of therapy by learning an embodied approach to healing your trauma. So the reason why is, take my student Natalie, for example. This is a trigger warning for you on verbiage suggesting suicidal ideation. So if you need to fast forward through the next 2 minutes, go ahead and do that now. You can press pause or mute. So Natalie was completely new to any kind of body work when she entered my program, complete beginner. She had heard of the idea of the body keeping the score, but never stepped into that kind of healing before. And she had tried everything. She tried therapy, books, podcasts, marriage retreats, workshops, all in attempts to improve her communication with her husband. And over the years, her depression was only growing because she felt like they were communicating on 2 completely different channels. Her number one fear beginning my program was failing and ending up stuck in the same bad habits or being abandoned and rejected and neglected. And how could she not fear that? That's all she knew for years. Trying another habit and ending up at the same place again and again and again for years doing this. And after 2 weeks in my program, for the first time, she communicated with an embodied approach, something I teach and coach my students to shift. And in her words, she said, I'm going to read to you in her words. She said, last night, guys, I finally sat down to talk to my husband to share with him how I've been doing and letting him know that I'm only alive because I don't want to hurt you or leave our daughter motherless. It was hard for me to push past my fears and be honest and vulnerable with him. Last night and this morning, I could tell he took our conversation to heart. I used the tools I'm learning in I Do Breakthrough, and my body feels more relaxed. I haven't tensed up today the same way I normally would when he touches me. This may sound small, but for me, this is huge. So this is in her words, and for me, after each week in our program, I take feedback on my students' level of hope, and this particular student came in at a 0. She felt completely hopeless for her own healing, for her marriage to improve, and week after week after week, I've followed the student's feedback, and it's grown incrementally week after week after week. She has hope again. Learning a new way of communication has nothing to do, guys, with the latest trendy hack, but it's simpler than that. It's coming back to yourself, back to your body, back to safety after everything you've survived. I'm going to draw one more picture for you today. And so, fun fact about me, I am a soccer player. I love soccer. Put in the chat if you love soccer. I've played my whole life, and it brings me a lot of joy. My husband and I still play on a co-ed rec league. And about a couple years ago, I came in contact, had an injury. I'm not doing a stick figure here, I'm doing the real thing. I had an impact on my shoulder. I hit another player like this, and it actually tore my rotator cuff. Okay? So I've had a lot of impact, and I've hit people in soccer before, bumped bodies, and I knew this hurt, but I thought, oh, this will heal. I'm just gonna let it heal naturally. And that didn't end up happening. The longer I went without getting it checked out or doing anything to address it, the stiffer I noticed it was getting. And then the stiffer it was getting, the more anxiety that brought me to move it. And so I moved it less. And then the less I moved it, the stiffer it got. You get it. It was this cycle, right? And so finally, after 8 months, it's like wouldn't even lift above my, I couldn't lift it higher than this. Finally went to a physical therapist, and they told me the exercises, the very small ones that I had attempted, were actually making it worse, and keeping it stiff was also making it worse. And these are the exercises you need to practice. And in a month, I had complete mobility, flexibility. I could do throw-ins again, which I used to love, and I thought I would never get to do that again. And guys, it's like completely normal. It's amazing. And so this we get on a physical level, right? If you have an injury, a little cut will heal on its own naturally, right? You don't really need to do much. But if you have a torn rotator cuff or a broken bone, we know that if you ignore that, it's either gonna get worse or it's gonna take forever to heal, or if you do the wrong things to heal it, it could actually make it like a lifelong permanent injury, right? So we get it physically, but emotionally, we don't treat our trauma and our grief and our hurt and our abuse in the same way. A lot of us sweep it under the rug, or we soothe it and cope with it in ways that are really trying to ignore the pain and not addressing the pain. Or we try things that are actually making it worse and we don't even know it. And so what we need to do with our emotional trauma, is really get into a place where we have the right tools that have been proven to help heal it in a way that is going to give you your flexibility back in life. Every year it seemed like the more trauma, the more experiences that I had that were traumatic for me, the more rigid I got. I was stiff as a board. Dancing was like I couldn't dance or move. There was no fluidity in my body. My neck, my massage therapists were like, Becky, holy cow, why is your neck so concrete, rock hard, like rigor mortis? My body was so tense and so stiff because it was holding so much of what I had been through. And the more I ignored it or tried to cope with it, by doing things that really weren't addressing the core of the problem, the stiffer I got. And I just got to a point where I was like, I'm not thriving right now. I'm barely surviving. And that's what led me to this work. And now I can move again. I can breathe again. There's fluidity on an emotional level and in my heart. I'm open. I'm not closed like I used to. So what this means, guys, is no matter where you're coming in, even if you're like a complete beginner like Natalie, right? You can restore your marriage. You don't need to be a yoga guru or a Buddhist monk or a trauma expert. You can do this no matter where you're coming from. It's really not hard. It is simple enough that I actually pass this to my kids. My kids can understand it, but it's just not talked about and taught. Okay, so I know what you're thinking now. You think, okay, I've done some work, or I'm willing to put in the work, but everything would be perfect if my husband would just put in his. And that brings me to our last secret today. The third secret is you can improve your communication even if your husband isn't putting in his own work. And the idea here is, even if he isn't on board or willing to put in the work right now, you can still transform your dynamic. Take Tanya, for example. Another one of my students just this week shared, she's been married for about 30 years, and she said, guys, I can count on one hand the amount of times my husband has apologized to me. And she said this week there was a interaction between them, normally that would trigger her anger, and she would lash out at him, ignore him, give him the silent treatment for 3 days, and instead she started practicing the tools that we go through on breath and body work, and she actually felt like it didn't affect her and it didn't set her off, and her husband actually apologized, and they looked at each other like kind of confused, and then he looked at her and gave this kind of face like, did that just come out of my mouth? And she's like, try not to make a big deal about it, but that's a big deal. And they moved through it, and there was no, to opposite sides of the house or elephant in the house. She was totally fine, and he apologized, and she couldn't believe it. Another example, take Danielle, another one of my students. Her husband was extremely resistant at first to any kind of help for himself, and even when Danielle wanted to enroll in this course, he was very skeptical and resistant. And that's okay. We talked on the phone. I got to answer all of his questions. I wanted him to feel, as confident as he could moving forward if his wife wanted to do this. And they were stuck, their situation, in one of the most common toxic dances I hear from women day in and day out. So she had been through trauma, and any advance of her husband towards her in a physical or intimate way triggers her to freeze up, close off, resist intimacy, and then he feels rejected, complains there's a lack of sex, and that only fuels her resistance and shame and feelings of confusion. Like, what's wrong with me? Why don't I want to be close to my husband? They talked about this topic until they were blue in the face. It was always the trigger topic in their marriage, and they continued year after year spinning their wheels, finding themselves in the same old stuck, disappointing spot. 4 weeks into this program, Danielle posted this in our group, and I'm going to read this to you too, so it's in her words. The other night, she said, my husband and I had sex, and I actually felt butterflies and so in love. I haven't felt that in a really long time. And I told him, don't take this the wrong way, but that's the first time in a long time I actually enjoyed intimacy and felt butterflies. He had a huge smile on his face. This program has helped me a lot so far to renew my mind and energy and grow that intimacy back. I'm slowly not feeling tense when he touches me. You can absolutely save your marriage without your husband being on board in this very moment. You have a rehearsed dance, do you not? And someone needs to start stepping differently. You can't wait for him if you want your marriage to change. He totally has the choice to respond in the same old ways he has, but you have the opportunity to set an example and give him the choice to heal too. Sometimes that sucks, being the bigger person or taking the lead, but let me ask you this. If taking healing into your own hands and taking the lead at this time delivers in the long run a mutually fulfilling partnership and intimacy with your husband, would you do it? Let's recap what we've learned. Secret number 1 today, even if you think you've learned every communication tip out there, you can still save your marriage by learning an embodied approach to communication. Secret number 2, how to reverse the toxic dynamic in your marriage without years of therapy by learning an embodied approach to healing your trauma. And secret number 3, how to save your marriage even if your husband isn't putting in his work today. So let me ask you, if you had the choice between trying to do all this without any guidance and having someone who has already done it in time and time again help you, guide you, and work with you to get the results, which would you choose? Type a 1 in the chat if you prefer to go it alone, and type a 2 in the chat if you'd rather have help and guidance. Can't see the chat right now, but I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of 2s. Yep, I see some coming in. So if you're interested in reversing the toxic dynamic of your marriage, then I'd like to tell you about my program that will teach you to do just that. It's called I Do Breakthrough, and it's designed to save your marriage. Right now, I love you all so much. Thank you for sharing your time and energy and space with me today. Huge hug to every single one of you, and I can't wait for your discovery session to see what is the best next steps for your marriage. Have a great day, guys.